What is going on, guys? DragonTamerBlayde here, back from our Elder Scrolls Legends, and today we have the final batch of cards for Alliance War. We've got something like 40-something cards to talk about today, so go ahead, grab a water, grab a snack, strap in. We're probably going to be here for quite a little bit. I'm going to try not to talk as much about each particular card as I do typically in one of these videos, but I also don't want to jip you guys out of the thought process, so I don't know. This may be a long video. Break it up into chunks if you need to. If you're new here, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, hit the bell if you want to be notified when I upload videos, and follow me on Twitch and Twitter because more content's never bad. Let's get on into it, though. We've got zero-cost cards up first. Back Alley Footpad, zero-cost 1/1, give a creature cover. It's fine. I mean, more zero-cost cards makes Sauron Pawnbroker more inconsistent. It makes Smuggler's Hall more inconsistent. There's not quite cover synergy just yet. However, gaining cover could be an okay thing to try and protect something in the field lane. Give this like a 1.5 to 2 star card. Obviously, there's not a lot going on there. It's a zero-cost card. Next up, we've got Forked Bolt. This card, on the other hand, zero-cost, deal 1 damage to a creature and to your opponent's face. This is a nice little cheap bit of removal. It is great in power synergy. If you have this with like Murkwater Guide in that theoretical Burn Assassin, you can generate 2 of these, which will be 2 pings for an empower trigger. I like this card quite a bit. It's the kind of card that I don't think I necessarily want to run in my deck, but I want to generate this every single possible way I can. And I think, we'll see in a little bit, but I think there's a Oatman that generates these, and that's going to be a very, very nice Oatman. I like this card a lot. I'd actually give this a 3-star card. Cheap empowered trigger, cheap face damage, while also helping to control the board. That is a very strong card. I like it quite a bit. Next up, we've got Sound the Alarm. All enemy creatures lose cover. It's another one that I don't think I ever want to run this in my deck, but occasionally you may be happy to see this generated. But also, maybe, I don't know. If you're really dedicated to making sure your opponent has no creatures on the board, this could be a good way to control the shadow lane, but it's only a one-time thing. Yeah, I'm not really loving this card. I'm not loving it a whole lot. Occasionally you'll generate this, and it'll be huge, but most of the time this card's going to be pretty lackluster for you. I'm going to give this card a 1-star rating. There's just not a lot there. And yeah, if this was like a support that said like enemy creatures can't gain cover, then it's really, really strong. But a one-time lose cover, not super great. Next up, we've got Bewildering Speed. 1-cost action. Move a friendly creature in each lane and give them each +1/+1. So this is more move synergy for like a theoretical move monk or move archer type of thing. Being able to do a double move is pretty good, because if you have, Dune Smuggler, that would be moving 2 creatures and giving them each +2/+2 with this action, which could be pretty solid, and that's not counting if you're moving Caravan Enforcers. Just moving in general can be pretty good, although I don't know how often you necessarily want to lane swap. But this is potentially +2/+2 and double move for 1, which isn't horrible. It remains to be seen, though. I think Mad Dash is a massively underrated card that doesn't see any play. So I don't see this necessarily seeing more play than Mad Dash. This isn't a dead card. I'm going to give this one 2 stars. I think there's some hope there, just not at the moment. Next, we've got Great Moot Squire. 1-cost 1/2 that after it trades becomes a 2/3. That's okay for a 1-drop. 1-cost 2/3 with no downside besides needing to attack once isn't that bad. But at the same time, we have Aldmeri Patriot. That is a 1-cost 1/2 that can become a 2/3 just for having an action in your hand. And I don't think I've ever seen that card played. So I don't think this card is likely to see very much play at all either. This is a 1-drop with an upside, so it's not horrible. It can become a pseudo 2-drop if it attacks 1 time. It's just, I'd rather run probably a 2-drop most likely. But maybe this can break through. Maybe this can become consistently seen, whereas Aldmeri Patriot was not. Because honestly, on paper, this card is decent. It's a 1-drop that, if it swings, becomes a 2-drop, and then you feel less bad about playing a 1-drop. Obviously, it dies to all early game removal, but, I mean, that's a risk you have to take when you're playing an early game creature. So this isn't quite a 1-star card. Give this card probably 2 stars. I don't know, we'll see. Next, we've got Outflank. Very solid defensive prophecy. 1 cost prophecy card. Action, give a friendly creature in each lane +0, +2, and guard. So that's pretty decent defensively. Probably better than Illusory Defenses. You're getting a total of 4 health spread across 2 creatures, and you're locking down each lane with a guard, and you get to choose which one's getting guard. So that could be pretty decent. Honestly, it may be decent even to play as not a prophecy if you need to protect a certain card and you don't have a guard in hand. This one's a little tough to figure out. This could be good against some aggressive decks, but are you going to want to play this card in a non-aggressive deck, like a control deck, trying to slow down your aggro opponent, or would you rather just run removal? I think more often than not, you'd rather have removal or some other card. But if a guard deck ever becomes better, and you have like Imperial Camp or whatever it is, this would be giving 2 different creatures +1, +2, which is pretty decent. I'm going to give it 1.5 stars for now. I just need to see more from this card. Like, Illusory Defenses doesn't really see play. So I'm not so sure that this will, but this effect lingers, whereas Illusory Defenses does not. Next up, we've got Ravaging Elixir. This card is very interesting. A 1-cost support with 3 activations, and each activation has the ability to deal 1 damage to your opponent. So this goes fantastic with Alchemy, which gives extra uses to all of your supports, that Empower card, and they also have synergy with each other, because you can activate this, which will Empower, which will make Alchemy get empowered, and then Alchemy can add extra uses to this card, which is already super, super strong. And then there's a card the other day that I don't know if we talked about yet. Let me see if I can find the name. It's a support card. Let me see if I can find it. I can't remember the name of it, but the effect was your support cards cost 1 less, and when you have 4 of them, you sacrifice a support to draw 2 Eastmarch Crusaders. Where is that card? I'm not quite sure when it off to, but there's a card that exists right now. I believe it costs 3. That you summon it, and your supports cost 1 less, and then once you have 4 active supports, you sacrifice that support, and it summons 2 Eastmarch Crusaders, which are 2 4/2s, and they potentially can each draw you a card. So I can see this card going amazing. Like, this card, that other support that I can't remember the name of, and Alchemy together is already just an amazing combo to consistently ping your opponent's face, and then you're summoning 4/2s, which draw you more cards, and you have like a 2 4/2s on the board. I'm very interested to run like a aggressive support mage running these cards. This is just great Empower support anyway, and dealing 3 damage to your opponent over the course of 3 turns isn't horrible. Obviously, you want to buff these uses up a little bit in order for this to be quite worth it, but still, I think this is a pretty strong card. I'm actually going to give this card like 4 stars, I think. This could be an amazing Empower card, amazing in those Burn Assassin decks. I think we could see an aggressive support mage that I'm definitely going to be trying day 1. I think this card is very, very strong. Next up, we've got Soul Wraith. 1 cost 0/5 Prophecy Guard. This is almost purely a road bump. However, we have High Hrothgar, Ring of Imaginary Might, and that other card, the Veteran card, that I think it's a 3-cost 2/4, that when you swing, all friendly creatures become attack equal to their health. So this fits into that deck pretty nicely, I think. So maybe Fat Warrior becomes Fat Sorcerer once the expansion drops. Other than that, this is just an okay road bump. The comparison would be the Orc. That's a 2-cost 0/5 with Regenerate and Guard. This sacrifices Regenerate but gains Prophecy and costs 1 less. However, I think in most cases this card's not going to be great outside of Ring of Imaginary Might or High Hrothgar decks. So we're going to give this card like 2 stars. It's not horrible, I just don't see it seeing a ton of play. Next up, we've got Cruel Axe. A 2-cost item with Mobilize, and summon +1/+1 for each enemy creature in this lane. So this item actually has no base stats, which is interesting. I think this is one of the first times we've seen that on an item. But also, it's got Mobilize, so it's pretty decent on that front already. And It can be up to a 2-cost +4/+4 item if your opponent's lane is full, which is pretty decent, and having Mobilize means if your opponent has a full lane, you can at least summon a 5/5 for 2, which is really, really good. However, the strength of this card depends on your opponent having a semi-full lane, which I don't know necessarily how good this will be since it doesn't also give guard. Because, like, if you want this card to be better than a Steel Scimitar, or at least even with a Steel Scimitar, so we'll say, like, Mobilize is worth probably 1 magic on its own. So if you want this to be even to a Steel Scimitar, your opponent needs to have 2 enemy creatures in the lane, at which point you're spending 2 to have a Steel Scimitar, and then maybe you trade over one of them. It's not a horrible card. It's just like I don't know how often you're going to get value out of this card, like true value that you feel good about playing it. So I'm going to give this card like 2.5 stars. I don't think it's horrible, and I think there's some decks it could fit into, and maybe it triggers or helps trigger some sort of OTK if you have like a rage deck. +4/+4 can be useful for 2, but I think you're going to have better items that you can run in general. Speaking of which, we have Banth Red Cloak. 2-cost Mobilize item, +1/+2, and your opponent can't target the wielder with actions until your next turn. This is amazing. This is going to have so many, like, now, typically, if you wanted to run some sort of combo that included an important creature or a high-cost creature or anything like that, you needed to be able to do it all in one turn, because if you drop down the big creature, your opponent had a chance, even if you hid your creature in the shadow lane, your opponent had a chance to Javelin or Dawn's Wrath or whatever until before you could finish setting up your combo the next turn. With Banth Red Cloak now, if you hide your creature in the shadow lane and then put Banth Red Cloak onto it, your opponent can't do anything to it outside of removing cover and hitting it with lethal, or Dawn's Wrath. So this is going to help a lot of stuff. Or just stacking items on something in the shadow lane for a big swing next turn. There's a lot of things that this card is going to open up. I think this is an incredibly strong item. Shadow Master has always been one of those cards that's been on the fringe of playability just because of how strong its effect is. And I think putting it on an item that costs 1 less, and you can have Mobilize, which is like a extra side bonus. You're more than likely going to want to put this on a creature you already have. But I think this is a very strong card. I'm going to give this like a 3.5 stars. It's going to make a lot of cards hard to answer. Like plopping this on Lyris in the Shadow Lane makes her almost impossible to answer. This card's going to be terrifying. I think it's a very, very strong card. Next up, we've got Emmerich's Warlord. 2-cost 1/4. All of your items have Mobilize. When a friendly recruit equips an item, Emmerich's Warlord gains +1/+0. So, there's some OTK type potential with this card. Like recruits and 0-cost steel daggers with salvage and weird stuff like that. You got Sparksmith and Emmerich's Warlord that work well together. Having all of your items have Mobilize is already very strong. 1/4 for 2 isn't great, but it's not horrible stat-wise. Means she should survive pretty well. And if all of your items have Mobilize, you should be able to buff her attack at least 1 or 2 pretty easily right off the jump, which would make her a 2-cost 2/4 or 2-cost 3/4, which obviously already makes her better at that point. And she has an aura effect. I think this is a pretty powerful card. I think you'll see some cheeky OTKs created around this card. And just giving all of your items Mobilize makes an items deck even more consistent. Since even if you're drawing items and you didn't draw your Mobilize items, you still can equip those items to an empty lane. So I'm going to give this card 3.5 stars. I think this is a very, very strong card. It needs some support to really work out well, but it's going to be one of those linchpins of items decks. Next up, we've got Inspiring Soldier. 2-cost 3/2 with Veteran Summon a 1/1 Recruit. So 2-cost 3/2 is mostly fine stat-wise. It's somewhat aggressive. And the ability, when you attack, you summon a 1/1, but only one time. So if this card goes off one time, it can be a 2-cost 4/3 worth of stats, which isn't bad. But mostly if you're playing this, you're going to want it to be for things like Recruit Synergy. So if you're playing like an Item Assassin with this card right here. Overall, I'm not sure, though. Alright, I don't even remember where I left off on this thing. It's like hours later. I got pulled away from the recording. I'm just getting back now. But I think this card is okay. You wind up with a 2-cost 4/3 potentially, which is about a 3 cost in stats. And recruits are decent. I'd give this card like a 2 stars, maybe 2.5. 2.5 stars. I don't think it's too bad. I just don't think it's too great either. Next up, we've got Ornamented Sword. 2 cost, Mobilize, Breakthrough, +2/+1. So this is Dagoth Dagger with Mobilize. Is that good? Potentially. I think I'd rather just run Dagoth Dagger most of the time. Mobilize is not a bad keyword at all. This is a little expensive for what you're getting. At best, if you mobilize, you get a 3/2 with Breakthrough for 2, which is probably fine. Like, there's the Ornery Kagudi, that's a 2 cost 3/2 with Breakthrough. Otherwise, you get a Breakthrough item. You only really probably run this in a dedicated items deck. In a more aggressive deck, you're going to run Dagoth Dagger. But maybe in that aggressive deck, you're willing to pay the extra Magicka to have a creature if you need it. Maybe this card's better than it looks on first glance. I don't know, though. I could see where, like, a dedicated aggro deck would be happy to be able to have a 2 cost 3/2 when it needs it, but also an item when it doesn't need it. So I guess the flexibility, I think, is pretty good. I talked myself into 2.5 stars on this card. It won't make or break a deck, but it could be a decent addition into certain lists. Next up, we've got Pact Oathman. 2 cost 1/3 with the ability Summon if you have a Agility card in play, +2/+0, or if you have a Endurance card in play, battle an enemy creature. This is a pretty good Oathman. Honestly, even if it just has, like, if you played this in Archer, getting a 2 cost 3/3 is pretty good. I think you could play it just like that. Triggering both is really good in the early game. It depends on how early you could trigger this. In the mid to late game, a 3/3 battling probably isn't going to be that great. However, if you get something early game and you get to trade right away and you're left with like a 3/2 or 3/1 behind, I think that's pretty solid. I'm going to give this card a solid 3 stars. I think it could be pretty solid in a couple Archer decks. But yeah, the real key here is going to be how early you can trigger both of those effects. Alrighty, next up, we've got Poison Dagger. 2 cost, Mobilize, Lethal, +1/+0. Pretty similar to the Daedric Dagger. 2 cost, 1/1 Lethal. However, this one has Mobilize. I think this is actually an upgrade from that card. Daedric Dagger doesn't really see play, though. Could Poison Dagger see play? I guess potentially. Being able to spawn a lethal creature on command for 2 is not bad. It would only be a 2/1, but still flexible. It's really tough to gauge the power level of all of these items, because Mobilize, we have to see the total power of Recruit as a whole, of the tiny little Recruit tokens, but tokens are nothing to shake a stick at, so items that recruit tokens or generate tokens shouldn't be ignored either. But I'd give Poison Dagger probably like a 2-star rating. I'm not really sure about it. Next up, we've got Black Marsh Prodigy. 3 cost, 1/1 with Veteran, +4/+4. So obviously, if this Veteran attack goes off, this guy becomes a 3 cost 5/5, which is very, very good. However, otherwise, he's an incredibly easy to remove 3 cost card, which results in pretty huge tempo loss in the early game if you don't get pretty immediate value out of this. So the only way this is really good is if he has charge or something like that to attack right away, and in which cost it's at least a 2-card combo. So I don't think this card is going to be very reliable. It's kind of like, what's that card called? There's a Khajiit that's a 1/1 that when it pilfers, it draws 2 cards. This card is very similar to that, and that Khajiit card is incredibly inconsistent and can't really be relied upon. Obviously, if this card works, the payoff is huge, but it's still silenceable after that, and it requires a lot of setup to get a 3 cost 5/5 in a color where you have 3 cost 4/4s and 4 cost 5/5s without any kind of setup and no downside. So why would you play this, is kind of my point. I give this card 1.5 stars purely because the upside is still existent. It's just I don't really think you'd ever want to take the risk to try and set it up. Next up, we've got Covenant Plate. 3 cost, Prophecy, Mobilize, Guard, +3/+1. So, if you hit this off of Prophecy, you get a 4/2 with Guard, which isn't bad. Worst case scenario, if you have to mobilize, you get a 4/2 with guard for 3, which is pretty close to right on value. You want your guards to have higher health so that they soak up more damage, but you're still getting a 4/2 for 3, and you can also equip this to other things that may have higher health. So this isn't a completely dead card, and it's a prophecy, so there's obviously pretty good value there. I think this card is better than... It's about better than average. Like I said, if it was like +1/+3 with guard, this would be a really, really good card. I think we already had something like that, though. But this can push some offensive stats, and it's a prophecy, so it can catch your opponent off guard if they were going to try and set up a trade after going face. I'm actually going to give this one 2.5 stars because I think it's a little bit better than your average mobilize item. The guard is just a keyword that can't be overlooked, especially when it's on a prophecy item. Next up, we've got Enlistment Officer. 3 cost 3/3 with the ability give all friendly recruits +1/+1. This makes all of those mobilize and summon a recruit abilities worth it, especially because it happens on turn 3. I could see some very low-to-the-ground aggressive strategy with mobilize items, that 2-cost green creature that summons a recruit with veteran. I think there's a couple cards with expertise summon a recruit. I could see some very low-to-the-ground aggressive deck with just a ton of draw and recruit summoning playing this. And I think this would be pretty decent in a deck like that. Getting +1/+1 across multiple bodies as early as turn 3 is obviously ridiculous. This could be a very snowbally card, especially in like a 2-color, very consistent, aggressive recruit-based strategy list. I think we could see this card a fair amount. I just don't know how many recruit cards are going to see play across the board. For that reason, I'm going to give this card 3 stars, but if a bunch of recruit cards are seeing play, I could see this going up to like a 3.5 star card because I think this card's pretty good. Next up, we've got Fighters Guild Berserker. 3 cost 4/2 with expertise, deal 2 damage to your opponent. So if you play this on, let's say turn 4, and you have turn 4 or turn 3 with the ring, and you have a 1-drop as well, you could drop down to 3 cost 4/2, which is a very fair aggressive body, and you can instantly deal 2 damage to your opponent's face. So I like it. I mean, it's one of those cards where you're getting a pretty good aggressive body on the board, which is what you want in an aggressive deck. A 4/2 is the kind of stat line you're looking for, unless you're going for a lower attack charge creature. But if you're playing a body that can't attack right away, a 4/2 is the kind of body you're looking for. Things like East March Crusader and stuff like that. And if you can trigger an initial 2 damage on top of it, you're getting a 4/2, which kind of has like a quote-unquote charge for 2 on top of it. And every turn after that first turn, so like worst case scenario, this guy could deal 2 damage, and your opponent spends removal on him. And if your opponent doesn't remove him, every turn he could be responsible for 6 damage on his own. So I think this is a very good aggressive card, and I think we could see this in a whole lot of red-based aggro decks. Not that we already don't see a ton of red-based aggro decks, but I think we could see this even more moving forward. I'm going to give this card 3.5 stars. I think it is a very, very good card. Alrighty, next card. Strategist Map. 3 costs support. 3 uses. Summon a 0/1 target with guard for you or your opponent. This is interesting. It's obviously good in Slay-based decks, since you can choose where the token goes. It also has usage for Jarl Balgriff decks, because you can summon the token on your side. It's also a way of just kind of slowing down your aggro opponent, getting multiple tokens just to put in their way as speed bumps while you find your answers. Could be decent. This is a very interesting card, and I think it really rewards your deck building and your strategy. No pun intended on the name, but it plays into multiple different strategies, and it's a very flexible card, and I love flexible cards. Obviously, this isn't a super powerful card on its own, so it's going to limit its overall rating, but I think this card can fit into a lot of different decks, and it's a very cool and interesting, well-designed card, so it gets brownie points from me for that. I'd give this card like 2 stars. If yellow Slay-type decks are ever better, this could be a pseudo-replacement for Night Mother, or just a way of summoning more tokens is really good. And just, I think it fits into a lot of different existing strategies. I don't know how good it'll be or if it'll ever stick into those decks, but the flexibility is a plus from me. Next up, we've got Supply Runner. 3 cost 3/1. Ramp card. If you have another creature in each lane, gain +1 max magicka. So this is interesting because it kind of plays into like aggressive ramp or like a tokeny ramp kind of thing. Because typically ramp creatures are pretty understated. You've got things like Hissgrove, which summons nothing until late game. Treeminder, which is woefully understated as a 1/1 guard for 3. You've got Thorn Histmage, which is now when you summon him, essentially a 3/4, but gets silenced down to a 2/4 with guard, which is still a decent card, but not too well statted for the cost. And then you've got the Dragon, which is a 6-cost 6/6, which is probably the most even statted, but also at that point you're already in the late game, so ramp isn't as impactful, and you want your 6 drops to be doing more than that typically. So this is one of the best aggressive statted ramp cards I think we've seen, and playing something like turn 1 Scouting Patrol into turn 2 Supply Runner in like an aggressive deck can allow you to continuously drop stuff onto the board and kind of swarm your opponent before they're ready for it. And I've just learned to never really underestimate ramp in this game. Ramp has always found a way historically, typically in scout decks, but historically in Legends, ramp is just always good. So this sort of ramp card, though, could create a new type of ramp deck, and I would be on board for that. As much as ramp doesn't feel good to lose to, I think I would welcome a new type of ramp deck that kind of is more aggressive and tries to ramp while being aggressive versus the traditional slow ramp decks that we've seen. Just more variety in the different types of strategies I think is a good thing for the game overall. As far as Supply Runner goes, 3-cost 3/1 obviously isn't great, but also getting to ramp would be pretty solid in that aggressive type deck. I think this would be like a 2.5-star card. You still have to find a way to blend being aggressive with ramping, and that's not an easy blend to do. It'll probably take a very skilled deck builder to do that. But I like the if you have another creature in each lane mechanic as a whole, rewards you for being on the board, and it's not just instant easy ramp. You have to work for it a little bit. I think it's a well-designed card overall, though. Next up, we've got Vanishes Scribe. 3-cost 4/3, reduce the cost of a random action in your hand by 1 as his expertise. So this can happen every single turn. This is the kind of card that can kind of snowball a game. Like, if I have a bunch of removal in my hand and I trigger the expertise, it may make my removal either cheaper or cheap enough to play 2 cards next turn, whereas I might have only been able to play 1 before. And now that I can play 2 cards, I might be able to remove all of your board again, which means Vanishes Scribe survives, which means his expertise goes off again. So you can see how it can kind of snowball depending on how the game works out. And even if you only trigger him once, honestly, a 3-cost 4/3 is pretty solid overall. And then just any kind of extra value you get off of that is just kind of a bonus. I think this is a pretty interesting card. Cost reduction is always powerful in Legends. I can see this getting played in a fair number of decks. It would need to fit into some certain decks at the moment, but some sort of mid-rangey deck could really benefit from this. I think it could be pretty solid. I'd give this card like a solid 3-star rating. I don't have a ton of ideas for him at the moment, but I could see as I'm building other decks coming back to this card to see how he fits in and how my action count is looking. Next up, we've got Bruma Oppressor, 4-cost 3/3. If you have another creature in each lane, set a creature's power to 1. I think that's a pretty good effect. 3/3 is a little bit understated for a 4-cost creature. However, being able to reduce the attack of something large, or more importantly, you're putting it into Execute and Grizzly Gourmet range. So this is kind of like a 2-card remove anything type of combo, as long as you have something in each lane. The type of decks are going to want to run this. It's still kind of playing into like that control token strategy, which I don't know if it'll work out, but I think it'd be fascinating to see, just because tokens has traditionally been a very, very fast deck. So if it finds its way into being like a slower control deck, that'd be very interesting to see. Bruma Oppressor obviously has a very strong ability, being able to lower a creature's attack to 1, even if you don't have Execute or Grizzly Gourmet ready. Dropping something down, even if it's your opponent's Young Mammoth, could be very powerful in a mid-range mirror, giving you the advantage on the board. I think this is a pretty solid card again. I don't think it's too strong, but I think it's quality. This is another one of those 3-star cards. You're going to have a lot of, 2 to 3-star cards, I think, in this card dump, just because a lot of the most powerful cards get shown off to create hype, whereas these are kind of the, I don't want to say filler cards, because these cards aren't bad. They're just not like the big ticket cards. Next up, we've got Guildsworn Incendiary. 4 cost, 2/6, expertise, deal 1 damage to all creatures in this lane. I think that's pretty solid. The stat line is pretty even for what you'd expect for a 4 cost. It's obviously not very aggressively statted, but it should survive pretty well. The only downfall is the expertise ability does hurt itself, but this should be pretty good against aggressive decks. You should be able to trigger it at least once or twice, and in the meantime, it should be able to trade with other things as it's doing so. It's another AoE for Doomcrag type of decks, but it will kill your Doomcrag, so it's not that great. I don't know. Like, I think it's a quality card. I just don't know if it fits into a lot of things at the moment, but it is good for clearing out recruits and tokens. It could work out, though, for setting up some trades. I'd give this like a 2 to 2.5 star rating. It's a weird one. I like the effect, but realistically, you're not going to be able to trigger this more than once or twice. You figure even if you trigger it on the turn you play it, that's 2 cards. You have a 2/6. It's going to hurt itself down to a 2/5. If it trades with something your aggro opponent is playing, it's probably down to a 2/2-ish at that point. And then if it triggers again, it either killed itself or it's down to a 2/1. But at that point, I think it did a fair amount of work. I guess it fits into the... Depends on the deck, but this could fit into like a self-harm warrior type of deck. It could be interesting in something like that. Next up, we've got Mournhold Taskmaster. 4 cost, 5/4. Friendly creatures with Veteran have charge. So that's pretty interesting, and it's the kind of card that I think Veteran needed, just because it had to attack. I'm interested to see what kind of late-game combos become possible, because most of the Veteran cards that we've seen haven't had a super high attack rating, so it's not like there's some sort of crazy OTK you could go for, giving like a 10/10 charge or something wild. But it does combo with that 3-cost guy pretty well that has Veteran +4/+4. But again, that's a turn 7 2-card combo to enable your 3-drop. I don't think that's that great. But giving Veteran cards charge in general is very powerful. And a 5/4 for 4 is not bad at all, especially with a very powerful effect. This card comes down to how many Veteran cards you are playing in your deck. Obviously, since he can only be played in a tricolor deck, it's not like you can do some hyper-consistent deck that only focuses on a couple quality Veterans. But in general, and assuming that more Veteran cards get printed down the line, I think this is a very powerful card, kind of in like the 3.5 to 4-star rating range. We have seen some good Veteran effects, and this could help them ensure that they trigger. Next up, we've got Telekinesis. 4-cost action. Equip all of your items in play to a friendly creature. In general, I think this card is incredibly powerful. If you're playing an item-heavy deck, just being able to move things around. Like, let's say you have 4 creatures, all 4 creatures have items. You attack with 3 of them, and then you telekinesis onto the 4th and move all of those items from the other 3 onto him. That creates one very powerful swing. That's not counting crazy things like Gardener of Swords being on the board, and you drop a Nord Firebrand, telekinesis, so all of your items go onto the Nord Firebrand for a pseudo OTK, and even if you don't OTK, all of the items that just equipped onto the Firebrand also go back onto your Gardener of Swords. This card is going to have a lot of crazy combos that become possible. Doing things like passing Dragon Priest Masks around, passing Mentor's Rings around. All the powerful items are going to be crazy, especially if the summon effects trigger again. This card is scary, and you're going to see a lot of crazy things be done with this card. And I can't wait to play with this card. We're going to have to make some sort of crazy item OTK deck with Telekinesis. I'm actually going to give this card 4 stars. We've seen enough powerful items and enough Mobilize and Prophecy Mobilize and stuff like that. And we have enough powerful items in the game already where this card can't not be good. The only thing that could ever limit this card is if items decks are so bad that they don't get played. But if items decks are ever being played, this card is going to be incredible in them. Next up, we've got Unrelenting Siege. 4-cost support. Friendly creatures with 1 power may attack an extra time each turn. So this has a lot of interesting synergies when you think about it. Things like that 1-cost 1/1 that we saw the other day that had charge. Now you can summon 2 of them, or you can shuffle 2 of them into your deck. Something like Cicero can attack 2 different creatures each turn. It depends on the power of your 1-power creatures, how good this card is, but even if you're going for like an Empower-based deck, being able to attack twice with your tokens in, let's say, a Token Monk, where most of your creatures are going to have 1 attack, if they attack twice, now that's 2 Empower triggers per creature. This is going to take some cheeky deck building, though, to be very strong, because building your deck too far around 1-cost creature, or 1-attack creatures, isn't going to be quite good for you, and even things like Master of Thieves and Thieves' Den combo doesn't synergize with this because after they attack once, they no longer have 1 attack. So, I don't know. This is an interesting card that I think somebody that's a much better deck builder than I is going to have to get their hands on to really see the true power of it. For now, I'm going to give it like 2.5 stars. But I wouldn't put it past someone who's a much better deck builder than I to make something bonkers using this card. Next up, we've got Valenwood Sentry, 4-cost 4/3, Prophecy Guard. Nothing too fancy, it's just another solid Prophecy, a 4/3 with Guard. Do we have any of those in the game at the moment? I don't think we have anything with that stat line in the game that's a Prophecy 4/3. But you can kind of liken it to Mystic Dragon. Ignoring Dragon Synergies, that's a 4-cost 4/4 with Prophecy. This one's a 4-cost 4/3 with Prophecy and Guard. Most things that die to 3 attack, or most things that die to 4 attack, die to 3 attack. So I think on the board-wise, this card is pretty similar to Mystic Dragon. Outside of dying to a handful more 3-drops or 2-drops than Mystic Dragon would. However, being the Prophecy Guard, I think makes him better in more scenarios than Mystic Dragon would. But obviously it's going to depend on what cards are commonly being played in the meta, which one is more reliable. This is just one of those, like, not super strong Prophecies, which I like, because I don't think Prophecies should be too good, but I think it's a perfectly playable Prophecy, and 4/3 is good enough stats to where you don't feel as horrible playing it on curve. It's really just a 1-turn later play. So I think this card is fine. I'd give this card like 2 stars. Some Prophecy-heavy deck is going to love to jam this in there, but most decks, I think, are going to pass on this card. Next up, we've got the Windhelm Gatekeeper. 4-cost 2/4 with Guard, and Veteran +3/+0. So 2/4 Guard obviously is not very good. That is about 3-cost in stats. Yeah, we have Camlan Hero. Camlan Sentinel, 3-cost 2/4 with Prophecy and Guard. This card does not have Prophecy, but if it goes face one time, it becomes a 5/4 with Guard, which the closest comparable card, I think there is an Orc. I think there's an Orc. That's a 5-cost 5/4 with Guard, I think. I believe so. I think it's a 5-cost 5/4 with Guard. So you play this card as like a 1 Magicka too many card, and if it swings once and survives, it becomes a 1 Magicka lower card. So I guess you can say it averages out to the cost of 4. I don't know. I really don't know how to feel about this card. I can see the situations where it'd be good, but I just think there's more situations where I'd rather just play a higher statted 4-cost card that's more consistent and that I can rely on, rather than a 4-cost card that could just instantly die because it has Guard. I don't have a ton of faith in this card, to be honest. The 5/4 stat line is obviously appealing, but dropping down a 4-cost 2/4 outside of playing it against a very low attack aggressive deck is more than likely going to just die to something on the board, or get executed, or just anything can happen to this card. It dies to so many different things, and so many like 2 to 3 cost creatures can trade into this card. Not so much 2-drops, but a lot of 3-drops can trade into this card. And the 2 attack means it's not taking most of those cards down with it. So you have kind of a dead turn 4 play where you can just play a better Guard. So I'm going to give this card 2 stars. There are probably some uses where it can get better. Just, like I said, don't have a ton of faith in this one. We've got Assassin Beetle. 5-cost 2/2 with Prophecy, and summon play a Prophecy from your hand. So Prophecy Assassin is looking like it's more and more likely. Something along those lines. This card's obviously miserable stat line, but you're playing a 2/2, which is 1 to 2 Magicka in stats with the Prophecy tag. And then, assuming you have another Prophecy in your hand, there is some value to being able to play that prophecy from hand for free. What I mean by that is typically the downfall of a prophecy is when you play it from hand or pay the full magicka cost, it sucks. So like, for example, Dark Harvester, 7 cost, 2/4 with guard, heal 4. Obviously paying 7 for that feels horrible. Paying 0 for that feels really good. So if you draw Dark Harvester and you're like, oh god, I don't ever want to play this 7 cost card unless I have to. Now Assassin Beetle, if you hit that for free, you can clear up another prophecy card from your hand and get them both out. And that kind of averages out the value of the occasional playing Assassin Beetle from your hand. Because honestly, depending on the value of your prophecies, if you're playing things like Fate Weaver and Dark Harvester, even if you pay 5 costs for Assassin Beetle, like if you have to play it from hand, paying 5 for Assassin Beetle plus Fate Weaver, or Assassin Beetle plus Dark Harvester, doesn't feel so bad paying 5 magicka for that. Paying 5 magicka for a 2/2 and a 2/4 with guard that heals 4 seems pretty good in my book. Or paying 5 magicka for a 2/2 plus a 3/3 that draws a card and maybe plays another prophecy for free, I think that's pretty solid. I think Assassin Beetle is a very, very good prophecy card, only in prophecy-heavy decks. I think that's the only way this card is going to fit in, but I think in those decks, Assassin Beetle is going to be a very strong card. I would actually give this card 3.5 stars in those decks. It removes one of the biggest weaknesses of prophecy decks, being not being able to play certain prophecies for free. Next up, we've got Guildsworn Oathman. 5 cost, 4/6, so pretty good stats. If you have a strength card in play, put an improvised weapon in your hand, and if you have an intelligence card in play, you put a forked bolt into your hand. Forked bolt is that action we saw previously, 0 cost, deal 1 damage to a creature and to your opponent's face. So either way, you are generating a 0 cost card if you have value from this card. So, stat-wise, 5 cost, 4/6 is pretty good. Should be able to trade and survive at least one time. And the value you get from improvised weapon or this, it depends on the deck. So like in a mage deck, I think this is one of those Oathman that may be better in dual color decks. And what I mean by that is, Crusader is typically going to be either an aggressive Crusader, token Crusader, or a slower Rage Crusader. And slower Rage Crusaders, I typically, in my Rage Crusaders, have run improvised weapon just because it gives you a random OTK ability with creatures that otherwise did not have breakthrough. Being able to play Guildsworn Oathman means you can get a 4/6 body on the board, which feels a whole lot better than needing to draw a 0 cost, and all you need to have is a red card in play, and then you can generate those improvised weapons guaranteed instead of needing to play them in your deck, so you can play 3 Guildsworn Oathman instead of 3 improvised weapon, and I'd rather have the extra 5 cost 4/6. So I think it's really good in that front. And in a mage deck, you can generate some more cheap removal and some more face pinging, and still have that 5 cost 4/6 to go along with it. I think it's good in both of those dual color decks. The tricolor deck is a little bit harder to predict, but I think this card's going to see play just in those 2 cards. I would play this card purely and a fair amount just in Rage Crusader because of the ability to generate the improvised weapon on commands rather than having to run them. I think it makes the deck feel a whole lot better overall. It's not hard to have a strength card in play. I think this is a pretty good Oathman. I'm going to give this one 3.5 stars. It's not quite going to make any of those decks, but I think the decks that it's going to slide into is going to make them a whole bunch better. Next up, we've got Joran's Vanguard. 5 cost, 4/4, veteran +2/+2, and give the top creature of your deck +2/+2. This guy's interesting. Most veteran effects, as I've looked at them, have been kind of like, I don't know if I'm willing to pay the extra magicka up front for the cost down the road. However, this guy is a little bit different. So 5 cost 4/4 obviously is not as good as it could be, but if it attacks once, it becomes a 6/6, which does... Most veteran cards seem to play into the, when you play them from hand, they are equal to magicka cost -1 in value, and if you get the veteran attack off, they become equal to magicka cost +1 in value, and that's how they wind up in their magicka value, or magicka slot. However, getting +2/+2 and becoming a 6/6 does make him around 6 cost in value, but also giving the top creature of your deck +2/+2 makes this guy a little bit better than your average veteran, in my opinion. This is one of the ones that I think I would consider running a decent amount in a mid-range type deck. Getting those buffs can be very powerful, especially depending on the creatures that you hit them on. I think this is better than your average veteran card. I would give this card like a solid 3 stars. Potentially a little bit better. Maybe I'm overrating the value of +2/+2 to the top creature of your deck, but I do think this is better than your average veteran. Next up, we've got Lion Guard Armaments. 5 cost, +3/+4 mobilize. So what's your closest cost in value? You've got Dwarven Armaments, which is a 6 cost +5/+5, no mobilize. You've got Dwarven Hammer, I think, which is a 4 cost +3/+3 in breakthrough, no mobilize. And Lion Guard Armaments kind of lives in the middle with +3/+4 and mobilize. So if you play him into an empty lane, you're getting a 5 cost 4/5 when you count the recruits 1/1 stats. Otherwise, you're putting +3/+4 and no keywords onto a creature. I don't know. This could be good in one of those telekinesis type decks, but I don't know how powerful this card's going to be overall. I feel like I'm not as great at judging items as I am at normal cards. I'm not saying I'm great at judging cards in general, but I just feel like I'm much more accurate when it comes to non-item cards. It's hard to predict how good items are going to be because items depend on the power of the deck around them. But this card's kind of telling me 2 stars at the moment, but it's also one of those cards where I feel like I'm misjudging it. The stat line is not weak, and depending on the combos that you can set up with this card, I think it's going to be pretty strong. But we've seen tons of items so far, and I don't see any way that they all see play. Next up, we've got probably my least favorite card in the set. Soul Shred. 5 cost, for each attribute your opponent is playing, banish the top 2 cards of your opponent's deck. Empower +1 card per attribute. So, what does this mean? So for 5, if you're just playing in a regular 2-card deck, if I don't empower this at all, I'm paying 5 to banish the top 4 cards of your deck. So if you're playing a 2-color deck, I'm paying 5 to banish almost 10% of your deck. That's not counting Empower. If you're playing a tricolor deck, I'm paying 5 to banish 6 cards at a minimum from you. Empower makes this stronger and stronger and stronger. And playing 3 of these, since this is not a unique legendary card, is going to be worse and worse as time goes on. And this is the first soiree into having an actual mill strategy in this game. I want to be clear when I say, overall, I don't think this card is super strong. I think 5 cost is very slow for this. You're essentially doing nothing on turn 5 if you play it on turn 5. So I don't think this card is super strong. But I think I've been consistent in saying I hate cards like this, and they feel horrible to play against. And it's also going to make people play Piercing Twilight even more to try and remove the extra copies of Soul Shred after they're played, which means you have even more Banish being played because you have people playing Piercing Twilight to banish the Banish. So now you have extra Banish going around. And that's if this card doesn't get empowered. If this card gets empowered 1 or 2 times, having the top 6 or 8 cards of your deck removed, or even higher, feels really bad, man. I hate this card. I hate it a lot. Power level wise, it's probably like a 3-star card. It's not like super OP. But this card is going to create a lot of really feels bad moments, both for you and your opponents. Sometimes your opponent's going to play it on 5. It won't remove anything super important. And then they kind of just lose the game from then on out. But sometimes they're going to play it on 5 and they're going to remove your win conditions or the most important creatures or something like that. And then you're going to feel horrible. This is like a lose-lose across the board. Somebody feels horrible when this card gets played. But I don't think it's super strong. It's just going to be one of those high roll, make everybody feel bad type of cards. I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about it, but this is by far my least favorite card that's been revealed so far. Next up, we've got Black Marsh Centurion. 6 cost 4/8. Veteran, gains guard. It would be one of the better statted guards in the game if it hit its veteran ability. 4/8 is very defensive in stats. It's right on par for a 6 cost. But we have like a 6 cost 6/6 with guard. We have... what's our next biggest guard? We don't have a ton of guards with this stat line. So this could be a potential like game ender against aggro if it sticks on the board. Yeah, even in mid-range, it should be able to soak up at least 1 or 2 attacks. So I think this card is, again, probably better than your average veteran card. Not quite as good as the other one. But this could fit into one of those, like, high Hrothgar type decks as well. So I think it gets a little bit of bonus in that regard. So I think that makes this card probably like a 2.5 to 3-star card. It has some synergies in a couple different decks. And I think gaining guard could make it one of the beefier guards in the game, or just one of the more resilient stat-wise for the cost. Next up, we've got High Rock Stalwart, another orc card. 6 cost 5/5, +2/+2 if you have an item in play. So it has synergy with A, aggressive decks in general, B, all of the items we've seen before, and C, the 3-cost orc, the 3-cost 5/4 orc we saw that is shackled unless he has an item equipped. So now these two get along. So you can have a 6-cost 7/7 orc, which kind of fits into around where the top end of an orc deck lives at the moment. This would be slightly slower than your average orc deck, but getting a 6-cost 7/7 is pretty good, I think. It would require orc decks running more items than they currently run, but maybe this card is kind of giving birth to a new strategy of orcs, like an orc item deck that plays that 3-cost card, this card, maybe some other cards. I think this card is fair. The summon ability is pretty easy to activate. It's not a super hard effect, and 7/7 for 6 is pretty decent. However, Stampede Sentinel is a guaranteed 6-cost 7/7, and that doesn't see play at all. So you would have to be playing this for the orc synergies. It's not a bad card, but I think it's probably like a 2-star card, maybe 2.5 stars because of the orc tag. But Stampede Sentinel doesn't see play, and is a guaranteed version of this. And I think Stampede Sentinel also has breakthrough, and you can't be damaged by actions, so it has way more text. This card doesn't really compete with that on that front, so it would really just be an orc type deck that you'd be looking at this card for. Next up, we've got Mage's Guild Conjurer. 6 cost 2/3 with expertise, summon a Flame Atronach, then upgrade the Atronach Mage's Guild Summoner summons. So I'm assuming that it goes Flame Atronach, then Frost, and then Storm. But I wonder how high this goes. So like if it goes by the traditional Atronachs that get pulled by like High Rock Summoner, it would be Flame, Frost, and then Storm. I don't know if it would go up to Lava, because Lava doesn't get pulled by High Rock Summoner. So it's one of those things that remains to be seen what this card can do. But this is a more reliable version of Heretic Conjurer with less high roll capability. So worst case scenario, you can trigger this and you'd get a 2/3 and a 5/3 with breakthrough. And then if you go after that, you get a 5/5 with guard and then a 7/5 with ward. This card's going to be fun to play with. I don't think it's going to be super, super strong. This should basically get removed the turn after you trigger the expertise. But it's going to be really cool in those plays where it sticks around. There's going to be some highlight plays regarding this card. But overall, I would give this card like 2 stars. I don't think it's super, super strong, but it's going to be one of those cards that you probably see on my channel quite a bit because it's fun. Next up, we've got Empire Dreadmage. 7 cost 7/5. If you have another creature in each lane, give a creature -2/-2. So we're seeing like the kind of cursey control effects between this, Debilitate, Sai Sahan. We already had the monthly card of the Scourge. We've got Drain Vitality. We've got Sheerpoint Dragon. And then you've also got things like Chara's Breeding Pit and Chara's Reaper and stuff like that. So 7 cost 7/5 isn't bad. That's at least a 5 cost in stats. And you're getting a -2/-2 for a pretty not hard to trigger summon effect. And -2/-2 is very strong. That on a card is a 3 cost card. And this also can come down 1 turn after Sheerpoint. So this could be a -3/-3 when this card comes down. So this card could be pretty powerful, I think. I like this card. I like the flavor. I like that the stats are low enough to where it's not super hard to remove afterwards, despite still being a threat if it sticks on the board. I'd give this card like 3 stars. I could even see it going up to like 3.5 stars if like a debuff control deck becomes more of a thing. Next up, we've got Guildsworn Honeytongue. 7 cost 0/5. With expertise, you may trade Guildsworn Honeytongue for an enemy creature. So this is a pro and a con. Because when you trade Guildsworn Honeytongue, it goes to your opponent's side of the board, and then if they trigger the expertise ability, they can trade it back with you. So you can trade back and forth with this card over and over again. So I think the best part, I think it depends. If this card, when you trade, triggers the enemy creature's summon ability, this could be a little bit better. But otherwise, you're really just going to want to trade for things like charge creatures or stuff like that. Or maybe getting a guard out of the way. No, not even getting a guard out of the way, because expertise is at the end of your turn. And yeah, so that nullifies charge creatures as well. I don't know. This is a weird card. Like, I think this could trigger some interesting effects. But you also don't get a chance to remove Guildsworn Honeytongue either. Like, I would say, like, if expertise triggered sooner, I could trade creatures with you and then just kill Guildsworn Honeytongue right away. However, it's at the end of the turn, so you have no chance to answer it. So you just trade back and forth. I don't know what kind of combo is going to exist with this card. I'm sure somebody will find a way to make this card kind of gross. However, in its current state, I'm going to give it like 1.5 stars. Just because, like I said, the best uses for this would be like charges and moving guards out of the way. But by nature of expertise, that just doesn't work. I think this would almost be more interesting as like a veteran ability. Next up, we've got Soul Burst. It's an action, 13 cost. It costs 1 less for each unique creature in your discard pile. And has the ability banish a creature, deal 2 damage to all enemies. So this fits into like that Snowflake deck I was talking about that runs Ruby Throne and a bunch of unique creatures. I cannot wait. That's probably the most excited deck that I have to try. And this is also another unique card that kind of fits into it. So 1 less for each unique creature in your discard pile. If you're playing a unique heavy deck, this probably will be down to like a 7-ish cost card by the time you play it, give or take. So banish a creature and deal 2 damage to all enemies for 7 is really good, I think. You have Cast into Time that is banished for 5, but it also banishes copies in the deck. But this also deals 2 damage to all enemies. 1 damage to all enemy is Fireball, and that's a 4-cost action. So you're getting 2 Fireballs, which would be the equivalent of roughly 8 Magicka, give or take. Obviously not quite. Or a Ice Storm Light that goes face. It doesn't hurt your creatures at all, which makes it extra good. And you get to banish an enemy creature. And that's not counting if you play creatures that pull... Like, if you have Iron in your deck, you could potentially pull Soul Burst back from your discard pile. Or any other ways to recycle actions. I think this is a pretty powerful card. It obviously needs a very specific type of deck to work out in. But in those decks, I think this is going to be an incredible card. And this makes running that type of Snowflake type of deck even more tempting. Because you have a really strong reward here in exchange for playing the creature. So you get like a better Ice Storm with a built-in banish for, on average, probably 1 Magicka more. I think this is an incredibly strong card. I think this is like a 4-star card, only limited by the inconsistencies that I think a unique heavy deck will have. Since you can't really rely on any one unique creature, you're going to be playing so many of them, they'll come at different times. But I think this is a very, very strong in that card in that deck, and I'm very excited to give this card a shot. Okay, so, god damn, we're an hour in. That's wondering why my voice is so dead. That's going to be it for this. This is the rest of the cards, guys. Tomorrow, I'm planning on just doing a general, my thoughts on the expansion as a whole, my thoughts on the keyword, what I think they did well, what I think they didn't do well. All that stuff. We'll give like a blind first impression tomorrow. And then obviously Monday we get on into the memes, and I'll be streaming on Monday as well. 7 p.m. Eastern time, give or take. So set your clocks for that if you want to experience Alliance War with me. We'll probably be opening around 200 packs or so. I'm very excited to give it a shot. But yeah, that's going to be it for now, guys. Let me know what you guys think of the cards down below in the comments section. Yeah, I'm looking forward to reading your guys' thoughts. There was a ton of cards in this video. Sorry it was so long, but I wanted to make sure we talked about them all to finish off the expansion. Thank you guys for hanging in there with me if you guys did make it through the entire hour. I know my voice is probably hard to listen to for an hour, but I appreciate you guys regardless. Alliance War is almost here. I am super excited. But yeah, we'll see you guys tomorrow. Peace.